This video is the third video in the three-part series on occupancy groups. In this video, we're going to practice 4 problems together, which are going to help you identify occupancy groups in any type of real-world situation or potentially in an exam setting. Let's start with practice question number 1. The first question says, what occupancy classification would 100 dwelling units in one building be assigned? When I answer these questions, I like to first read it through like I just did. And then what I do is I highlight or underline keywords in the question, and I'll also write find on the screen here. So I know I need to find something in some unit. So that'll help me get prepared. So what occupancy classification? So it's asking for an occupancy classification, which is a type of group or a use based on the building code. And here it says 100 dwelling units. So we know that it's giving us information, 100 units, and in one building. Okay, I think that's enough information for us to find the occupancy classification. So when it says dwelling units, I automatically know that that's probably going to be under a residential group occupancy because people are sleeping in the building. So I'll go to the building code. I'm not affiliated with Upcodes, but I'm just using their free version here, which is why there's this start 2-week free trial on the screen. But you can just ignore that for now. If you're interested, then I'd recommend that you check it out. But I'm accessing the code here for free on their website. It just means that you're not going to be able to see any diagrams or images that come with the paid version. But other than that, you can search for the CBC, the IBC, or any other type of code that's listed on this website. So to find the occupancy classification chapter, we know that that is chapter 3. So I'm going to click on chapter 3 here on the left side of the screen. And then it gives me all these different groups. And since we're talking about dwelling units, I'm just going to go to residential group R, which is section 310. If you're following along with me, I highly recommend that you do. You can pause the video and go and find the code section yourself and read through them. But what I like to do is not just assume that it's a particular group if I'm familiar with the code. I like to just double make sure, just in case. So we'll go through and read each of these subgroups here. There's R1. I can click on R1, and the cool thing about the chapter, it'll take me straight to that section. So R1 says occupancies containing sleeping units where the occupants are transient in nature. These include hotels and motels that are transient, so it's definitely not that because occupants in dwelling units are likely non-transient. So let's go to R2. I just click on R2. And in this occupancy, there's more than 2 dwelling units and they're primarily permanent in nature. So that sounds about right. And what do you know? It lists apartment houses there. And this sounds like an apartment complex with 100 dwelling units. So R2 is likely the case here. And then just to make sure, R3 is a facility that contains no more than 2 dwelling units. So that's definitely not in our choice. And then R4 is for persons who reside on a 24-hour basis where there's custodial care. Definitely not an R4. So R2, as we said, makes the most sense since it's apartment houses. So R2 would be the answer of our group here. It was that simple. It really is to your benefit to get comfortable with the code and navigating the code, whichever format that you're using it in. I use the book version. I use the digital version. I'm always going back and forth. But the cool thing about a digital version, if you have a PDF or if you're using Upcodes, is you can always put in keywords and search those keywords and it'll take you to those sections even quicker. Let's move on to our practice question 2. What is the occupancy classification of an educational facility from the 6th to the 8th grade? Okay, so let's read that again. What is the occupancy classification of an educational facility from the 6th to the 8th grade? So we need to find a group, again, an occupancy group. So I'm just going to write that here. And it's already giving us a hint. It's saying educational, 6th to the 8th grade, but we want to double make sure because depending on what grade this facility is, it can either be classified as a group E or a group B. So let's just go and double check in the code. Let's go to the other screen again. I'll minimize this group R. And here is group E. Let's look at the definition of group E. Group E says occupancy that includes more than 6 persons for educational purposes through the 12th grade. So there we have it. Our answer is actually E because we're 6th to the 8th grade, which is less than the 12th grade. And that is a group E occupancy. So this is simply a group E occupancy. Let's go to our next practice question. Those were a little easier. Those were helping you get comfortable navigating the code. Now let's see how these occupancy groups actually affect design factors for life safety and certain pieces of information about your building, like how large you can make your building, which is exactly this next question. Let's read it together. A lecture hall is converted to a college classroom. If the building is already sprinklered S1 and type 2A, how much more is the maximum allowable area of the new occupancy? Let's read it again and underline some keywords. You have a lecture hall converted to a college classroom. So we know we're going from this to this. Building is sprinklered, and it's a type 2A. Sounds like this building already exists, but the client potentially wants to add on some more in addition to this building, so they want to know how much more they can make that allowable area. And key thing to note here, which is why it's bolded in white within this question, is how much more. So how much larger can the allowable area be for this new occupancy? So the first thing that I would do is I would find what is the occupancy of a lecture hall, and then what is the occupancy of a college classroom. Let's go and find lecture hall in the code. Based on what I know from watching part 1 and part 2 of this video, if you haven't already, I would definitely recommend that you do. But we've identified that lecture halls potentially fall under the assembly group occupancy because it takes a large amount of people and puts them into a relatively small space, and a lecture hall seems to fit that definition. So here in Upcodes, I'm going to click on Assembly Group A, and let's read what it says. Let's start with A1 and see if we can find a lecture hall listed in this group here. So A1 says motion picture, television, concert halls. Nope, that's not it. Let's go to A2. This is more for food and drink consumption. That's definitely not a lecture hall. Let's go to A3. Okay, so this says uses intended for worship, recreation, amusement, and other assembly that's not classified anywhere else. Let's look through this list. There's amusement, art galleries, lecture halls right there. It says it right there, lecture halls under group A3, so that's what it is. So let's go back to our other screen here, and I'm just going to write above the question that that's an A3. And let's look at what a college classroom would be. Now remember, a college classroom is clearly identifying that it's not under the 12th grade, it's above the 12th grade. So if you remember after watching my previous part 1 and part 2 videos here, then I've identified that anything above the 12th grade is going to be a B occupancy for business. But if you didn't know that, then I think it's going to take you a long time to kind of figure out where this actually falls. But that's why knowing these pieces of information will really save you time. So we'll just go to group B in the code and verify this information. So if we go to group B, I'm going to click on group B drop down, and let's see what it says. So the use of a building for office, professional, or service type transactions, storage, etc. All right, I'm going to read through this list. Let's see if it says anything specific to educational. There it is. In the middle of our list, there is educational occupancies for students above the 12th grade. That would be considered a B. So that's kind of a tricky question because you would think that anything educational related would be a group E occupancy, but in this case, it's not. Anything above the 12th grade would be a group B for business occupancy. Let's go back to our other screen and write that down. So college classroom, I'm going to write B here. So we're going from an A3 to a B occupancy. So now that we've classified our group occupancies, sounds like we need to go and find our maximum allowable area table in the code. If you're not familiar with this, that's okay. I'm going to be reviewing this in a future video, but I just want you to know and see for yourself how occupancies actually affect other design decisions. which ultimately affect life safety for that group. So let's go find how the difference in square footages from an A3 to a B will change the size of this addition or this future college classroom. Going back to our code again, maximum allowable areas are actually found in Chapter 5 under General Building Heights and Areas. So I'm going to click on that. So building area is 506. I'll click on that and it takes me straight to that section. So here I'm looking for a table. In the top, you'll see type 1, 2, and 3 listed. We'll use that type 2A drop category or that column. And then we'll look for A3. S1 means that it's sprinklered. And we'll just take where the two converge. So A3, S1, and type 2A meet at 62,000 square feet allowable. We're starting with 62,000 square feet. And now let's go look for occupancy B. So we know that type 2A is the third column, 1, 2, 3. Let's remember that as we go down because the top row disappears. We're in section B here, S1. If you take it to the third column, let's just make sure that that is the third column. Yes, it is. So if we take it to the third column, then we get 150,000 square feet if it's converted to a college classroom. That is significantly larger than the previous allowable area. Back to our screen, we'll write 150,000 square feet. So we're going from 62 to 150. Let's do the math on that. So 150 minus 62,000. So 150,000 minus 62,000 is 88,000 square feet. That is the answer to our question. Here's our last question, which is practice question number 4. What is the fire resistance rating for a firewall in a facility with 8 occupants under constant 24-hour supervision? All right, so let's go ahead and underline the words. So we have fire rating, that's a keyword. In fact, that is what we're going to be finding, a fire rating. For a firewall, that's another keyword. And the facility is described here. There are 8 occupants, and it's under a constant 24-hour supervision. Okay, so we know that this is probably going to fall under an I for institutional occupancy group, but let's just double check. And then once we figure out which occupancy group, we can move on to the fire resistance rating for firewall section and identify the hourly rating. Again, first thing we want to do is just go to chapter 3 and figure out what is the type of I occupancy subgroup for this facility. Let's go through each one. I1, we know that I1 from reviewing part 2 of this video. I1 is for persons in a facility under constant 24-hour supervision, but they're able to assist themselves without any help in case of an emergency. And in this question, it's kind of stipulating that these persons would potentially need assistance. So I would stay away from an I1 for this question. And for I2, it says buildings or structures for medical care on a 24-hour basis. So there's that time component for more than 5 people, incapable of self-preservation. So yeah, this looks closer to what we're talking about in this question. There's hospitals, nursing homes, and things like that. So I think this would be a good one. We'll just double check for I3. I3 is really for jails, correctional centers. That wouldn't fall under this group. I4 is also occupied by more than 6 clients who receive custodial care for fewer than 24 hours. But we know that in the question it said under constant 24-hour care. So it's going to be an I2. The next thing that we would do is go to Chapter 7. And Chapter 7 is all about fire and smoke protection features. So I'll click on Chapter 7. And the question was asking about a firewall resistance rating. So we'll go to section 706, firewalls. And there is a 706.4 fire resistance rating. So we'll click on that. And if you go through each of these various sections under Chapter 7, like exterior walls and fire barriers and partitions, each of those have their own fire ratings. But here for a firewall, We'll look for anything that's related to an I2, but actually we have an I, which encompasses all the groups, and that's in the first row. So that would get a fire resistance rating of 3 hours. And it actually has a letter above it, the letter A, which if we look at the bottom of this table, it says in type 2 or 5 construction, walls shall be permitted to have a 2-hour fire resistance rating. Since the question did not really specify a type of construction, we'll just keep this simple and stick to the 3 hours. And this is following this philosophy of we want to always err on the side of a more stringent requirement if we don't have enough information, as in this case. So we'll err on the side of 3-hour rating. So the answer to this question is a 3-hour wall. Well, there you have it. We've just gone through 4 practice questions, and hopefully you feel like you've mastered the essentials to be able to answer any kind of occupancy related question. We've shown you the definition and the various different occupancy types for the most common buildings in this 3-part series. And we've shown you how the occupancy can be a critical factor when it comes to affecting all kinds of design decisions, from how large you can make a building to fire safety requirements. If you found this video helpful, please do give it a thumbs up. It does help the channel a lot. And say hello, drop a comment below if you have any other questions, let me know, and see you in the next video.